Hi Patriots, my name's Colin. Welcome back to the Maryland Maverick. Today I have a guest on to talk about a really bad problem that's going on in the state of Maryland, an overreach of state power in our local politics, our local political leaders, our local elected officials are having their rights and their power and their authority stripped away by the likes of a Democratic presidential or a Democratic governor a Democratic administration that has power currently in the state of Maryland. So I'd like to introduce Dan McHugh.
Thanks, Colin. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So,
Of course.
so Dan McHugh is actually a political consultant. He's a former legislative assistant in the state house. He actually worked for Dan Cox when he was a delegate back in the day. Dan, if you could tell the podcast a little bit about yourself and your experience, that'd be wonderful.
Well, it's a long, it goes back as far as, got first involved in politics in 2010 in the state of Maryland, volunteering for Governor Bob Ehrlich's campaign against Martin O'Malley. He sort of it's what inspired me or really got me wanted to get engaged in the political arena in the beginning. I wasn't happy that he had lost to Governor O'Malley. So, I did that, and then, I was involved for a long time in Montgomery County. That's where, I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, the largest county in the state. I, got very involved with the GOP there for many years and got involved with the Young Republicans. I was the vice president at one point, and then the president until 2019, and was involved with the Central Committee there and advocating on issues locally in Montgomery County and Rockville at their county seat, county council and the county executive on a lot of things, and parlayed that into going to work for Delegate Cox for 4 years in Annapolis, which was probably, as far as my time in politics, I'm most proud of as far as the things that I accomplished in working on things I've worked on. I've worked on campaigns in 3 different states, Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Worked on the Trump campaign in 2020 in Pennsylvania, moved there, lived there from July until November. That was quite the experience, and obviously the losing was certainly a very painful experience. But anyway,
Hey, politics, that's what it does to us sometimes.
But you know what, all the sweeter in 2024. So that made Trump getting reelected in 2024 all feel so much better for me anyway, for me personally. And so
It was a great American comeback. That's what it was.
One of the greatest, absolute, no argument there. And so so I worked on a lot of issues in the legislature. Delegate Cox was assigned to the Judiciary Committee, so we dealt with a lot of stuff on public safety especially, and a lot of very intense and heavy bills. One of the biggest things we fought was police reform, something that Delegate Cox stood very much against, basically, taking away the rights of police officers and authority, giving more power to the criminals in the state, and essentially Maryland's crime skyrocketed after the legislation passed, as to be expected. The only thing that really sort of brought it back down was some course corrections by a couple of politicians who changed policy. Well, we can touch on that another time. But the point is, so that's sort of my background. Yeah, I've done a lot of things in politics over the years.
Here in the state of Maryland.
In the state of Maryland.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point. I mean, the crime rate in Maryland, these cities like Baltimore, it's just like an absolute war zone. It's like a third world country in these places, especially the inner city in Baltimore. And these places have been controlled. These are Democratic strongholds that are completely controlled by Democrats at the city level, at the mayoral level, at all these different levels.
Yeah.
Why do you think these local Democrats in Maryland are so terrible and fail so awfully when it comes to the crime issue?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that I got the experience of doing in 2019 was I participated in a trash cleanup in West Baltimore put on by Scott Pressler at the time. And it was in a bad part of town. There was an open air drug market. And it really was an eye opener for me, because you saw these neighborhoods in disarray, trash everywhere, people just like walking around the streets all strung out on drugs. And I got really angry. I remember I was like, where's the mayor? Where's the city council? Where is anybody to help these folks? And they weren't anywhere to be found. They didn't come out and help us that day. Ironically, a Baltimore City police officer stopped me at one point and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, we're doing a trash cleanup in the city. He goes, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, that's like across the street over there's an open air drug market, right? I said, "Didn't know that." Turned out, ironically, he knew a guy I went to high school with, a guy named Jerry Frazier, who's on the Baltimore City Police Department. And I asked him if he knew Jerry. And he said, "Yeah, he's my sergeant." I said, "Hold on, let me call him." So I called up Jerry, and I was like, "Hey, I'm with your guy here. I said, he's doing a great job, by the way, but we're doing a trash cleanup. And he said, do me a favor, Jerry said, take a picture and put it on Facebook. And I did, and it was funny. But then the guy went and bought us some Gatorade. The cop went and bought us some Gatorade. But the point is, you know, what I believe is that, you know, the politicians in Baltimore, places like that, what they do, the only thing they do good is get elected. They don't do good on the schools. They don't good on public safety. They certainly don't do a good job on providing services to its poorest communities, who they claim to be the champions of. What they're good at is around November and October and late September is grabbing all these folks up. You know, hey, you know, I'm an organizer with some sort of union. You know, hey, we know you're probably, you know, you're hungry, right? Yeah, here, we got a sandwich for you, a pack of smokes, and a bottle of something. Let's go. But before we give you that, let's go down to the polling place and we'll fill out this ballot for you. And that's what they do. And that's how
right around election time.
Yeah,
they
exactly.
Just pull out, and this reminds me of a story that I was reading about a year and a half ago of these Latino like dictatorships and these fake democracies, basically, where most the people or rather these very, very rich, wealthy landowners that are getting reelected, and they just get like a roasted hog for their citizens when the elections come around and say, oh, we're good buddies, hey man, do some fist bumps, things like that.
Ravens games,
thumbs up and handshakes and all that fun stuff. And then once the elections happen, once they get elected, they don't do anything at all for the American people, for their citizens, for the people that they're supposed to be representing. And speaking of that, I actually wanted to touch on the main topic of this episode, today's podcast, which is the State Permitting Review Board that the Governor Moore has created through an executive order, which mostly is consisting of his own staff members, people like, recruits of Secretary Jake Day, who used to be the mayor of Salisbury, and, Secretary of Planning Rebecca Flora, and some other individuals, someone from Baltimore as well, and, basically created for the purpose of creating more centralized power, that's basically concentrated at the state capitol, able to, have more control over these local processes that are mostly delegated for, communities and these county level, municipal level governments. So could you touch on that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So what Governor Moore, in his early inception of his administration, when he appointed Secretary Day, the former mayor of Salisbury, Jake Day, now Secretary Day of Housing, an affordable housing initiative is something that's part of Governor Moore's initiatives, and Secretary Day, as the mayor of Salisbury, worked hard on this issue at the local level as well. So I think that's part of the reason why the governor was interested in giving Jake the job, making him the Secretary of Housing, because he sort of touched on the subject at the in the city. Now there's definitely questions and criticisms and critiques of the job he did of that. I mean, at the end of the day, the city of Salisbury ended up having to raise property taxes in 2023 by 5% after he, split town and, didn't have to really worry about the implementation of many of the programs that he helped create with the city council. He split town for a bigger job and more money. And then, the current mayor, Randy Taylor, inherited a lot of these things. But back to my point, so what they found, at least with trying to push this affordable housing, is that there's resistance around the state, especially like in Western Maryland and on the Eastern Shore, where there are more conservative counties that don't necessarily want these projects brought to their neighborhoods and their communities. Baltimore City and Prince George's and Montgomery would be on more board with the governor and Secretary Day on this, because they're Democrat run, and so obviously they sort of believe in the same philosophy. So what they started to do was they wrote a bill. They put a bill in the affordable housing, to push more affordable housing, and that was also zoning reform. And so this thing passed, and so now that was the first step, the zoning reform. So that stripped away zoning authority from counties and municipalities around the state to put it more in the hands of Annapolis to make these things happen. And then the second step was the governor in December of 2024, December 20th, 5 days before Christmas, when nobody was paying attention in Annapolis, he did this by executive order to create this state permitting board. And it was sort of a gift to developers and builders as well. and obviously it was going to centralize power to help do this affordable housing initiative, obviously. So, and then, Rebecca Flora is the chair of this state permitting board, who is the director of planning for the entire state of Maryland. So she works directly for the governor. Secretary Day's fingerprints are on this board. His top operative, Julia Glanz, who, is now hit him in the housing department, also worked in his administration in Salisbury, was put on this board as well. And then the best part about this whole board, this is the scariest part to me, is that the Governor Moore appointed through and worked with the mayor of Baltimore, Brandon Scott, to have Justin Williams, who's the vice mayor or the assistant to the mayor, essentially, of Baltimore City, who has been now appointed to this board by Governor Moore, and the media is coined him as the quote permit czar.
Permit czar.
So it almost seems like it seems like. So I'm going to use a wrestling analogy. So there was the Four Horsemen back in the day, right?
Yeah.
And there was Ric Flair, who was the leader, and Arn Anderson was known as the Enforcer. He was Ric Flair's top lieutenant, the Enforcer. And, Arn Anderson got things done for the Four Horsemen. Largely, the biggest thing that Arn did was if they wanted to beat up a guy, they waited out back and whacked him with a tire iron. But the point is Mr. Williams is going to be the enforcer for this power team that's been created in Annapolis by Governor Moore, Jake Day, and the mayor of Baltimore City.
So he's going to be implementing the project, the agenda of basically expediting the process that would usually for permitting, for zoning, and all of that. And this power is going to be given to the state government as opposed to these local governments who have a better understanding of their
counties or municipalities at the local level. That's why you have local planning and zoning permitting boards. That's why almost every county government and municipality has one. And so, and interestingly enough, too, on top of that, Brandon Scott, the mayor of Baltimore, gave them a very strong weapon. He just hired a nationally recognized planner. This guy's sort of a rock star around the country on planning. He's done planning all across the country on affordable housing and in Canada. So he's sort of, I'm sure he's going to be playing a vital role in helping, execute this. This is a specialist that's been brought in to help get the job done. And so on top of all of that, with the power structure which they've created through the legislation, through the executive order, then the next step was, how do we pay for all of this stuff? How do we make this housing, quote, more affordable? On Juneteenth of this year, Governor Moore rolled out his plan to do that in Cambridge, Maryland, a $400 million disparity program, essentially, that's going to be, dispersed around the state to all these identified impacted areas by the Moore administration. So it's funny, it's interesting, one of the things I had a hard time finding was, I wish they had listed all of it. They sort of put it on this map that you had to it's hard to navigate, but they didn't give us a direct list of all of the impacted areas around the state. But it's most of the counties, and I believe, Cambridge is clearly on the list, and I'd say down on the shore, Salisbury is probably going to be on that list as well. Obviously, part of the issue, part of what's happened to Salisbury with Mayor Taylor's situation in that downtown market is he's sort of in the crosshairs of this because this power structure has been created, and some frustrated developers, more specifically David Layfield.
He's a developer. That's trying to put up some some real estate and development over in Salisbury, in the city of Salisbury, right?
And David Layfield has a very close relationship for a long time with Secretary Day. When he was the mayor, they worked on projects together, and he was used to, it was a good relationship. Mayor Day was very developer friendly. Mayor Taylor, on the other hand, it's not that he's against development, but he is simply, as the mayor, as any responsible executive generally reviews things that comes in front of their desk and read them before they just rubber stamp it or put a stamp of approval on it. And Mayor,
so that the community and so that the city can actually benefit and profit. Because I've seen these other deals that have been made throughout the city where land is sold off for as cheap as $1, and the city basically does not profit at all. These developers, that are building in the city of Salisbury, and it's as crazy.
You're absolutely. And the craziest thing is this parking facility that's over by Brew River that Frank Hanna and the Hannas thought they owned. Mayor Day gave it away on another deal, unbeknownst to them, part of that deal for $1 or whatever. And so that's how. And so Mayor Day Mayor Taylor, I should say, uncovered these things by reviewing these things and said, wait a minute, hold on, back up the truck, there's something wrong here. And so, because he didn't just rubber stamp it, the developers got angry. They went to Secretary Day, who went to the governor and said, hey, my friends are having some problems with this mayor. And so abracadabra, hocus pocus, this thing's been fast-tracked by the state permitting board all of a sudden. And Mayor Taylor found out about it reading it in a news article.
Wow, so his power is basically just stripped as a local leader, as a mayor, because Governor Moore and his team of elites have basically seized that control and made it more centralized at the bigger government at the state level.
And that's a smaller thing. The bigger picture on all of this, without question, why this is all being done, is the massive affordable housing initiative that Secretary Day and Governor Moore have been working on for pretty much since the inception of the Moore administration in 2023.
So affordable housing, and $400 million is being invested in that project.
Yeah.
Before we go into the affordable housing project or scheme, depending upon how you look at it, what I want to ask is, what is the importance of zoning and permitting for people that aren't necessarily familiar with local politics, for how things are built, how things are done at the local level and the state level?
Think of it this way. You want your house built. You want a grocery store built. You want an airport built. You want a hospital built. It all starts with a permit. It all starts, you have somebody, the investors or the builders or the developers or, some person that owns a business that's trying to start their business has to go in front of a permitting board to get that permit to build it, to start it. So that's how important it is. Permitting is so important. If we didn't have permitting approvals, nothing would be built. So, that's and then zoning as far as when it comes to commercial or residential or commercial real estate and things like that, hey, you can get a deal on your taxes if you can get your property rezoned as agriculture, for example. So zoning is permitting, zoning, and planning is so important and vital to any community's pretty much existence.
So my question is, because the vice mayor essentially of the city of Baltimore has become the quote-unquote permitting czar of the statewide permitting board throughout the entire state of Maryland. Do you think this means that the rest of Maryland is to become the goal is to make the rest of Maryland more like Baltimore City?
I mean, it's hard not to say that basically, but Baltimore City coming to your front door on the Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, and all in between. So I mean that's the idea, it seems. And, they want to build these units, and, there's going to be a process, grant processes that nonprofits and builders and developers can apply for this, $400 million pot of money that the governor has set aside. And then with the caveat that they have to build it certain, specifications and in these certain impacted areas to help a certain group of folks, who have been impacted by, things in their lives.
And by impacted, we mean impoverished areas, places that are poor.
Yeah.
So what the state of Maryland is doing, in essence, what the state permitting board is trying to do, what's the goal, is to get the $400 million, that money which is from our taxpayer dollars, allocate it to these different developers who have to build affordable housing units, which are basically just poor, cheap, Section 8 kind of homes. It's kind of like, I mean, this seems, in my opinion, like communism. I mean this seems pretty communistic, if you ask me.
It's a redistribution scheme. And remember, Governor Moore did, he vetoed the reparations bill that was passed out of Annapolis. So but then he came up with his own plan, and this was the plan, the $400 million that he talked about in Cambridge on Juneteenth. And Secretary Day was there. He gave him a giant hug. I mean, they seem to like to hug a lot. I don't know what's up with that. But anyway, probably because of the amount of money that thank you for this giant payout of $400 million that's going to go all over the place, and who knows to who and where. It'll be fun to track where the money actually goes. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, definitely. You probably won't be able to find out once it's all said and done with.
Well, we're not even sure the budget secretary of Maryland knows where the money's been going, because she recently resigned from the administration, from the Moore administration. So yeah.
The thing is, at least with what's it called, the reallocation of money to like former slaves or whatever. What is that? reparations.
Yeah, reparations. Yeah.
At least the reparations bill would give, like these, which I totally disagree with, by the way, the ability to actually live the American dream theoretically.
Yeah.
I mean, you get a house, you get a mule, whatever, you get some acres of land.
Sure.
This just makes it so that people that are poor stay in poverty because they are getting these houses that are basically funded and allocated. This money that is allocated by the government, and kind of like a collaboration and a scheme between the government of the state of Maryland and these developers, which are basically putting these poor Project 8 kind of homes in these poor communities, which are disadvantaged already, driving down the property values in these areas. I mean, it's just like it's making the people more dependent upon the government itself.
Exactly, and listen, this is socially engineering affordable housing. If you want to try to make housing more affordable organically, you can do things like not raise taxes and fees by $2 billion like the Moore administration has done in 3 years. You cannot, you don't need to put heavy-handed regulations on traditional energy providers to drive up energy rates intentionally like the Moore administration has done to drive people to wind and solar. Wait, there's no wind and solar to tie into, and now energy rates around the state are up 1,000% since 2023, since Governor Moore has become the governor. And the last thing the Moore administration has done to make housing more unaffordable in Maryland is through SSTAT, the Department of Taxation. They send people, inflating the value of property. So these notices come out in the mail, oh, your house is worth more money, which is not necessarily a bad thing. The problem is, if you're planning to live in your house for the next 15 years and not sell it, you're going to be paying a higher property tax bill every year to the county and the state. But none of that's making housing more affordable. That's all making housing more unaffordable in the state of Maryland for the average person to live, or the average business to even do business in the state. So, yeah.
And the Moore administration continues to, and has already basically, increased taxes on these small businesses, on these businesses throughout Maryland. Mm-hmm. And that drives them out of the state. Our economy suffers. I mean, we're $3 billion in the hole in Maryland. And when Hogan was governor, a Republican governor, we were $5 billion in the green. I mean, we had a $5 billion budget surplus. I mean, I'm really hoping that someone like Hogan steps up, or Hogan himself, because he has the name recognition, he has the power, he has the influence, and the popularity to really, whoop Moore. I mean, a lot of people don't see it as a possibility, Moore losing, because he's projected as a 2028 presidential candidate, and that's really the only thing he wants. I mean, the only reason he's governor of Maryland at the moment, not because he cares or gives a damn about the state, it's because he wants to run for president in 2028, and that's obvious. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
I 100% agree with that. It's pretty obvious when you're out in, Italy on George Clooney's boat on Labor Day weekend what Governor Moore real intention is to do. And like you said, Governor Hogan had $5 billion of COVID money. Some say, well, it was just federal money, which it was. But Governor Hogan could have done whatever he wanted with the money. He could have committed $5 billion worth of spending on all these projects. But he said, there's a lot of problems. He saw the forecast coming down the pipeline on his way out the door, and he said, I'm going to put this money in the bank. And he told the Moore administration that. He said, look, I put $5 billion in the reserves. We got a lot of things coming down the pipe. You should really watch out for spending, because especially with Kerwin and things like that, and the Kerwin blueprint is bankrupting the state as we speak every day. It's one of the worst things ever passed. But he warned Wes Moore and his administration. Now they ignored Hogan, and Wes Moore just went on the spending. He just continued to spend, and basically he had to pay back all of the folks that helped get him elected, all the special interests, the unions. They all came with their hat in hand and said, "Please, Mr. Moore, may I have more, sir?" And he gave it to them. And now, like you said, $3 billion in the hole. Now $2 billion worth of tax and fee increases in 3 years. Energy rates up 1,000% around the state. And as far as public safety, especially with juvenile crime, it's been a complete and utter disaster. They recently had to get rid of the director of the juvenile services for the state because he did a horrible job. So I mean, these are the things that we've been dealing with for the past 3 years in Maryland under the leadership of Maryland Governor Wes Moore.
Yeah. And what I really don't like about the social engineering scheme for affordable housing, basically putting up people in these, cheap government-funded, government-provided homes that are, bad areas, not good. it's incentivizing people to be lazy. It's incentivizing people not to work because Governor Moore is going to come in with $400 million and make it go away. You're just going to live in dire circumstances. I'll tell you guys right now, and I'll tell you too, Dan, my father is someone who you could say is the victim or the user of the government welfare system. Mm-hmm. He's been on welfare, he's been on Social Security, disability income, even though he's perfectly capable of working, and I've seen him do it many times. Yeah. Perfectly capable of working and going and making a life for himself and being personally responsible, which is what Republicans believe is an absolute necessity for any American person.
Yes, sir.
And instead of doing that, he's been funded basically by the government to sit around and do nothing but drink and be a lazy individual. Right. I mean, you know, I love my father. I know he struggles with mental illness and things like that. But unless our government and our state, you know, begins incentivizing responsibility and actually working and giving back to the community as opposed to just giving handouts for people to live in these dire economic circumstances, with the caveat or with the benefit of not going to work and, you know, and facing some challenge and difficulty in life, then, you know, we're going to be in a really destitute state, and our society is going to be, you know, filled with people that are basically just welfare fiends, and that's not a good thing for anybody. It's not good for our society. It's not good for our future. It's not good for the children who were born to these individuals, because, you know, they grow up in bad households, bad families. Yeah. And it's really a byproduct of bad democratic governments, in my opinion.
100%. Ronald Reagan said it best years ago. He said the best social program is a job. I mean, he had.
Ain't that right?
He had a way with words, that's for sure. And, yes, these folks have been impacted in things, and I've seen it for a little bit. You know, spending some time in West Baltimore in 2019. You know, just my little bit of time there, just how bad it is, and but again. It's called, you have these mayors that come along and these city councilmen in a city like Baltimore saying that, vote for me and I'll get this thing back on track, or, and it's not happening. It's not about that. It's about staying elected and staying in power and building a voting base that'll keep you in power for 50 years or 100 years or whatever. And if these people become self-aware and self-empowered, that, our elected officials are not telling us the truth, they're not doing a good job, they would be more inclined to vote for somebody else. But, if you keep them down in the gutter and out, they don't care. And so therefore, hey, here's this ballot, we'll give you a sandwich and a pack of smokes and let us fill it out for you. And that's what they do. So,
That is the unfortunate reality.
Yeah.
So your plan is to pass legislation at the state level which will provide guardrails and extra protections for municipal and county governments on this, planning, permitting, and zoning authority. Could you just go into detail a little bit about that in closing?
Yes, I will touch on that, and I don't want to name any names as far as the folks I've been talking to, but yes, I have spoken to delegates about this, senators, mayor, municipal and county leaders as well around the state. And yes, the guardrails, the idea of guardrails / protections for municipal and county permitting, planning, and zoning. The bill is a simple, almost like a formal request to request a meeting. For example, like what's happening in the situation with Salisbury, but with Mayor Taylor, that he would be able to request a meeting with the state over this expedited market and the parking issue, and then that meeting would formally have the governor's office, his, state delegates and senators that represent Wacomico County / Salisbury. You would have on it, county leaders like the county executive, the county council, and then obviously the city council, and they would, have a conference call or a formal meeting where, the mayor can put his concerns on the record to the state and all the stakeholders, together, so they can try to maybe come, to a consensus or some sort of compromise to work this out without having to go the route of, suing and legal litigation, because a lot of the problems around the state right now, you're seeing these things happen around, not just in Salisbury, in Western Maryland on the Piedmont Reliability Project, down on the shore with the offshore wind project in Ocean City and Bethany Beach, Delaware, lawsuits. And in Salisbury there's been lawsuits. So in other words, why can't, bringing folks together and trying to negotiate and this would be a formal process so that municipal and county leaders can do that and then have more protections how to run their counties and municipalities, and not just having the state run, shove things down their throat. So
yeah, ensuring that a state board of elites who have essentially out of touch with these local communities aren't the ones with the power to make these really, really important, as you said. Permitting and zoning is really the foundation of building any kind of development or community, neighborhood, whatever it might be. And I just want to clarify, I have no issue with development. I think developers provide a lot of great opportunities for workers. In Wycomico, for instance, there's this new Amazon plant that's being built, and I think that's going to provide a lot of jobs, and it's going to be a very good thing for workers and for people and citizens around the area. But what I don't like to see is my community and our city ripped off by these developers because they're backroom deals and relationships between people like our former Democratic mayor and current Secretary of Housing Jake Day, and these really wealthy developers who were basically just going to rip us off. So thank you, Dan, for coming on. Appreciate it, and thank you guys so much for watching the Maryland Maverick. Please subscribe. We would really appreciate it. If you'd like to make a donation, please contact my phone number 443-591-3325. We are providing legitimate, true, conservative news to the public, to Maryland. Thank you so much again, and have a good night.